Most parents spend money on their children every single day without ever thinking of it as an investment. The school fees, the extracurricular activities, the birthday presents, the weekend trips, it all goes out and it feels like spending because that is exactly what it looks like from the outside. But buried inside the ordinary financial life of a family with children is one of the most powerful investment opportunities available to any person, and most parents never fully recognize it for what it is. Investing in your child is not a metaphor. It is a financial strategy with measurable returns, a specific timeline, and a set of decisions that compound over time in ways that are just as real as any index fund or property purchase. The difference is that the returns do not show up on a brokerage statement. They show up in a human being who enters adulthood with resources, habits, knowledge, and capabilities that most of their peers were never given. This video is about how to do that deliberately. The first category of investment is financial, and the most powerful financial tool available to a parent is time. If you open an investment account for a child at birth and contribute a modest amount every month, the compounding that occurs over 18 years produces a number that most people find surprising. $100 a month invested from birth in a low-cost index fund, assuming a historical average annual return of around 7% after inflation, produces approximately $43,000 by the time the child reaches 18, not from $100,000 of contributions, from $21,600 of contributions. The rest is time doing what time does when money is left alone to grow. The implications of this are significant. A parent who starts this process at birth gives their child a meaningful financial foundation before the child has made a single decision of their own. The child arrives at adulthood with options that their peers who did not receive this gift do not have. They can use it for education without taking on debt. They can use it as a deposit on a first home. They can use it to start a business. They can leave it invested and watch it continue to compound for another decade before touching it. The specific use matters less than the fact of having it. Most parents who do not do this are not being financially irresponsible. They simply do not know that the option exists, or they believe they cannot afford it. On the affordability question, the honest answer is that $100 a month is genuinely difficult for some households, and those households should not be made to feel that they have failed their children by not investing. But for households where $100 a month is possible, with some adjustment to spending, the case for prioritizing this over almost any other discretionary expense is strong. The birthday party that costs $300 is a lovely memory. 3 months of index fund contributions at $100 each is a different kind of gift, one that keeps compounding long after the memory has faded. The second category of investment is educational, and it begins much earlier than most parents think. The research on early childhood development is consistent and decades deep. The cognitive foundations that determine how a child processes information, builds relationships, manages emotions, and approaches problems are laid in the first 5 years of life. The quality of language a child is exposed to, the responsiveness of the adults around them, the extent to which they are read to, spoken to, and engaged with in their earliest years, all shape the neural architecture that the rest of their development is built on. This does not require expensive programs or specialist intervention. It requires presence. It requires conversation, real conversation, not just instruction. It requires reading together from before the child can read themselves. It requires asking questions and being genuinely interested in the answers. It requires letting children struggle with age-appropriate problems rather than solving every difficulty for them, because the struggle is where the capability is built. None of this costs money. All of it costs time and attention. For working parents, time and attention are often the most genuinely scarce resources, which makes the investment harder to make than a financial contribution. But the return on an hour of genuine engaged attention with a young child is compounding in ways that no financial instrument can replicate. Before we continue, take a second to like or subscribe to Kraftwise. It is a simple action from you, but it helps us tremendously. The third category of investment is financial literacy itself. Teaching a child how money works is one of the highest return investments a parent can make, and it is one of the most consistently neglected ones. As covered in a previous video, schools do not teach this. The financial system is not designed to explain itself. And the families that produce financially literate adults are almost always the families where financial concepts were discussed openly at home, where children were included in age-appropriate conversations about money, where the mechanics of earning, saving, spending, and investing were treated as normal topics rather than private adult concerns. Starting this early matters. A 5-year-old can understand the difference between spending money and keeping money. A 7-year-old can understand that money grows when you leave it alone and shrinks when you use it. A 10-year-old can understand interest, not compound growth, and the basic concept of an index fund if it is explained in terms they can relate to. A 15-year-old can understand the full picture, how credit works, what a mortgage is, how taxes function, why starting to invest early produces dramatically different outcomes than starting late. The practical mechanism for teaching financial literacy is simple. Give children money with a structure attached to it, an allowance divided into 3 portions. Spending, saving, and giving introduces the core financial decision of allocation before the amounts involved have any real stakes. When a child saves toward a toy for 3 months and then buys it with their own money, they have learned something about delayed gratification and the relationship between time and purchasing power that no lecture could have taught them. When a teenager watches a small investment account grow over a year, compound interest stops being an abstract concept and becomes a lived experience. The 4th category of investment is health. Physical health in childhood has long-term financial consequences that are rarely discussed in personal finance contexts, but are substantial. A child who develops healthy habits around sleep, nutrition, and physical activity in their early years carries those habits into adulthood with compounding benefits. The adult who sleeps well, eats reasonably, and moves their body regularly has lower healthcare costs, higher cognitive function, better emotional regulation, and more productive working years than the adult who does not. These are not small differences accumulated over a lifetime. The specific investments here are not complicated. Regular sleep routines from early childhood, meals that include real food alongside the treats that are part of normal family life, physical activity that is enjoyable rather than punitive, sport, play, movement for its own sake rather than as a discipline. The goal is not to produce an elite athlete or a health fanatic. The goal is to establish the baseline habits that protect long-term function and reduce long-term cost. The 5th category is relational. The quality of a child's social development, their ability to form genuine relationships, to manage conflict, to communicate clearly, to understand the perspectives of other people, determines a significant portion of their life outcomes. Employment research consistently shows that the skills most valued by employers and most difficult to teach in adulthood are the relational ones. The ability to work with other people, to resolve disagreements productively, to communicate in ways that are clear and considerate, to build trust over time. These skills are built at home, in family relationships, in the way disagreements are handled, in the modeling that parents provide of how adults relate to each other and to the world. A child who grows up in a household where conflict is managed constructively, where communication is direct and respectful, where emotions are acknowledged rather than suppressed or weaponized, learns a relational toolkit that serves them in every professional and personal context for the rest of their life. This is perhaps the most demanding category of parental investment because it requires the parent to be their own best example. You cannot teach a child to manage conflict constructively while managing conflict destructively yourself. You cannot teach a child to communicate with clarity and respect while communicating with contempt or avoidance. The investment in relational skills is, at its root, an investment in the parent's own behavior as the primary model the child is observing. The 6th category is experience. Children who are exposed to a wide range of experiences, different environments, different people, different cultures, different challenges, develop a broader and more flexible cognitive and social repertoire than children whose world is narrowly bounded. Travel, when it is accessible, is one mechanism for this. But the local version of this investment is equally powerful and far more accessible. Museums, community events, conversations with people whose lives look different from the family's own, volunteer experiences, time in nature, exposure to music, art, and literature. All of these expand the frame through which a child understands the world. The financial return on experiential investment is indirect but real. Adults who have broader frames of reference are more adaptable, more creative, more able to navigate environments that are unfamiliar, and more effective in the increasingly diverse and interconnected workplaces and communities they inhabit. The child who has only ever been exposed to one way of living has a narrower set of tools for navigating a world that will require flexibility. The seventh category, and the one that ties all of the others together, is psychological safety. A child who grows up knowing that they are genuinely loved and accepted by their parents, not conditionally, not only when they succeed, but as a baseline fact of their existence, develops a psychological foundation that is extraordinarily difficult to replicate through any other means. This foundation produces resilience. It produces the capacity to take risks because failure feels survivable. It produces the willingness to ask for help because asking does not feel like admitting inadequacy. It produces the ability to form secure attachments in adult relationships, which is one of the strongest predictors of long-term well-being and life satisfaction available in the research literature. Psychological safety does not mean the absence of challenge or the removal of all difficulty. Children who are protected from every struggle do not develop the resilience that comes from navigating difficulty with support. Psychological safety means that the child knows the support is there, even when the difficulty is real. It means that the parent's love is not contingent on performance, and the child knows this not because they have been told it, but because they have experienced it consistently enough to believe it. The cumulative picture of investing in a child across all 7 of these categories is of a human being who arrives at adulthood with a financial foundation, the knowledge to grow it, the physical health to sustain a long, productive life, the relational skills to build meaningful relationships, and a successful career, the experiential breadth to navigate an unpredictable world, and the psychological security to take the risks that create the life they actually want. None of this requires extraordinary wealth. The most expensive item on this list is the financial investment, and even that begins to work meaningfully at $100 a month. The rest requires time, attention, consistency, and a willingness to think about what you are building rather than just getting through the week. The parents who invest in their children this deliberately are not giving them an easy life. They are giving them a better equipped one. The difficulty does not disappear. The world does not become simpler because you were well prepared for it. But the gap between a person who enters adulthood with these resources and a person who enters without them is real, significant, and compounds over the course of a life in exactly the same way that money does when it is invested early and left to grow. Your child is the longest investment you will ever make. Treat it accordingly. Check out our previous video on why nobody teaches about money in school, because understanding why your child will not receive a financial education in the classroom is exactly the context you need to understand why the financial literacy investment at home is one of the most important decisions you will ever make as a parent.